What's up, bros? Welcome to another Brograph tutorial. I'm Dave Koss, and it's been a little bit, I know, but we're going to have a really good tutorial today about Octane hardware and software. You might have seen the brief overview I did about Octane and just my initial thoughts and a little bit about the software, but I had some people ask about the hardware installation process and all of that, and I'm going to do something a little more in depth today. Sorry I've been gone for a little bit. I lost my voice pretty bad, and it actually lasted a long time, for weeks, and it's still not 100% back, but I'm ready to do some more tutorials in the new year. We had quite a few this year. I've got a lot in the queue, and I'm recording a bunch more over New Year's weekend. And Brograph talks are going to be some of these, talking about the industry itself, not just tutorials, but talking about things like contracts. I think that's going to be the first one I'm going to do. A lot of people are kind of lost when it comes to contracts / agreements and breakdowns. I've got a couple big projects I've been working on, which is another reason I haven't been able to put out tutorials as much as I'd like. Real big projects I worked on, and so I'll be breaking some of those down as well. I got permission to do that, and that's going to be fun. And so we're going to get into it. I've got a video here that I'm going to play through, and I've kind of pre-recorded some bits when I did my installation. I had one card in, one GTX 760. It's an NVIDIA EVGA CUDA card. It was in the last tutorial. It was actually in the computer, and I went ahead and bought another one because I really like it. It makes it twice as fast. That's the really cool thing about these cards, is it's not like when you do CPU rendering, where it's kind of a gradual curve of, you know, when you actually double your render time. This is like for every identical card you put in, you cut your render time in half. Like, it literally is like, if you're trying to calculate, well, what if I buy 2 more cards? That's going to get you half the render time. It's going to be twice as fast. So the other cool thing about it is it makes one hell of a gaming system. I actually installed some Windows partition so that I could do some of the games for Oculus Rift that are not on the Mac, and it's super sweet. There's the Moon base one, which is absolutely incredible. There's something Destiny something, I forget the name of it now. It's where you're doing missions in space, and the graphics card is great. It runs things like Skyrim. So it's not just that it's good for rendering, it's also good for these other things because they're great video cards. I'm also using it for other applications like editing. You can see here that, well, I don't know if you can see on my timeline, I've got a lot of green and yellow, which in Premiere is a good thing. Before I switched video cards, everything you would see here on this timeline was red, especially when it came to like MP4 files, and there's a lot more real-time video playback. It plays a lot better. Not to mention, I'm going to actually play back HD video 1080 while I'm screen capturing at the same time. So it's really great. It's completely smooth. They're great cards to have across the board for everything you do. So let's go ahead and get right to it. I have to apologize ahead of time, though. I tried to fix this the best I could, but something was going on with my GoPro, so I got some glitchiness that goes on, but it doesn't change anything. You'll still get the picture here, but you might see that as we go through. So here's my messy setup. I'm going to have to clean this up a bit later on, but I got this EVGA NVIDIA card GeForce 760. Did a lot of research on this, and in the box it comes with a lot of things. It's got adapters and software and all that stuff. You don't really need that. You really even don't need the cables. You just need the card. So if you take out the card, there's a bunch of wrappers on it. You've got, that's always fun to peel off that plastic. Oh yeah. Then you've got the protective pieces that go over the electronics that go into the PCI slot in the motherboard. So you can kind of see what it looks like. I had empty slots here, and I'm running on a 2010 Mac, which has the little slidey thing on it here. Some of them don't have that to unlatch. make sure you unplug your computer, of course, and start putting things in. Now, you don't want to put these up at the very top because the fans are going to be right on top of a lot of things in the computer. It's not really great this way either, but you get a little more airflow. So what I've done is I've taken off these rubber pieces, which you usually use these two little areas to connect the cards together on certain PCs with certain motherboards. I actually put them in to kind of give a little more room and cushion the card just a little bit. I have to mention, don't do any of this and mess it up and blame it on me. I am disclaiming right now. So you get your cards installed, got the 760 in there. Before you do this, also I want to mention you must install the CUDA drivers before you unplug your old video card. That's very important. Don't forget that. Here's the power supply. And I got a 650 watt power supply times 2. Yes, you need them both. You have to have a dedicated power supply for each card. Trust me, I learned the hard way. A lot of people don't think that you have to have 2 power supplies. I tried. It didn't work unless you want to get like one huge, ridiculously massive power supply. But this was cheaper. So you've got these cables, the pci-e cables, and they're 8 pins on each side. And then you've got the power. Now here's the thing. These aren't hooked up to the motherboard. So you got 16 PS on, that's power supply on. It's going to vary depending on your power supply. But you have to link that to a ground in order for the power supply to stay on, since it's not plugged into a motherboard. And what I've done is actually, to link this, I've gotten a staple, a real thick, heavy-duty staple, like for stuff you would do outside, and actually plugged in the power supply on to the ground so that it forms a connection, and the power supply will always stay on, because you got to have this on all the time to power these cards. Then I use the extra cables that came with the power supply that I won't be using, and I just cut them just to grab an extra little piece of cable. There's a reason for that. You got to do grounds on these. So I stripped the cable. You know, I got 3 power supplies running here, so you're gonna have grounding problems. You want only one ground. So I'm grounding everything to the case instead. So I made that little loop, and then I put the other end into another ground inside of the power supply. Consult your manual. Then I taped it all up. And that loop on the other end of that one cable of that ground is going to go into the case, because we want everything going back to the case. So now initially, if you take the power supply and you turn it on, you see that the fan is going. That means it worked. So none of this is connected to the computer yet. I'm just making sure it works. You're actually going to take some pliers and you're going to cut off the ground. You do not want to ground separately. You want them all to be grounded to the case, and the case is the master ground. You will have trouble with audio and all sorts of stuff if you don't do this. So here's the screws that I set up on the side of the case from some of the mounting, and we'll get back to that later. First, we're going to plug all of this in. You've got 8 and 8 on each side here, and then on the other side you have these cables that actually have 6 and 2, 6 and 2. And the cards take 6 and 8, so you have to do one of them 6 like that, where there's the 2 extra, and then the other one goes in and you put in the extra 2, so you've got 8. So you've got both of those cables plugged in, and that's one card, and then you have to hook up a power supply to the other card and do the same thing. Make sure that you face both of them outward, of course. Don't try and put them on top of each other. The fans need that airflow. So you can see I've set them next to each other, and then I've taken those separate grounds and put them back into these screw holes that are actually mounting one of the old CD-ROM drives that I'm not using. So everything is now grounded to the case, and that's it. And so the ground on the computer is actually the master ground. You turn on the 2 power supplies, and you boot up then after you boot up, you're not going to see a boot screen on your computer. That's totally normal. You'll see nothing, and then all of a sudden it will shoot up like this. You'll have a white screen, and then it will all of a sudden just boot into OS X. And that's really all you need to do. I know that's kind of a quick overview, but hopefully that'll give you an idea of what you need to do, and if you need to research more, you can get online. Now, people ask me, why did I pick that particular card? Well, the reason is I did a lot of research. There's the same amount of CUDA cores, and this is where I even get a little fuzzy here. There's the same amount of CUDA cores in those cards than some of the more expensive cards and some of the more recent cards, but what I am sure of is that those cards work natively with Mac OS X, and they work on they work on this particular body style. Because if you have a Mac Pro, what are you going to do? The new Mac Pro, it's the garbage can, and you can't upgrade the cards without spending a whole bunch of money for externals, or your only other option is to go PC. And a lot of people don't want to do that, like me. So I think there is like a GTX 9 something or whatever, and I'm just not sure if that works with this. This will work. You could possibly send these somewhere to get flashed if you want to have the EFI or whatever it is, EFI that shows a boot screen. Really not a big deal, because, you know, what does it matter? You don't see the Apple logo when you boot up. Who cares? But it works. It comes up. Everything works fine. Just make sure that you put that CUDA driver in there before you take all of this apart and plug these in, or it won't work. So that's the overview there. So once you get Octane, I'm going to go to Cinema 4D and kind of show you how this works. Once you get Octane installed, and what I would do before you go through all this is make sure it's going to work. Before you buy Octane, they even recommend that. Get the demo and make sure it works. So you'll have an Octane dialog window here, and I'm just going to go ahead and open it up and show you some of the options. If I go into settings, that little gear, and then I go into these settings, there's account, and right here I've got my account set up. And when you get the when you get your license, here's what happens. You have one license for one computer. You got to activate and deactivate and all of that. You'll go to their site, and there will be a special user ID and a special password for the Cinema 4D plugin. Do you have to install the full render engine, the standalone? No, you don't have to do that. So if you're not interested in it, you can just let that go. Don't worry about that for now. The account, you put that info in here, and you hit activate, and it activates your plugin. And that's really all you have to do. Briefly, I'll go through some of the basic setup. If you watch my V-Ray tutorial, I'm kind of going to do the same thing here. I'm going to show you a real basic setup so you can get started and understand how this works. It's about materials, it's about tags, and it works a little bit better as far as interpreting old native materials than V-Ray does, because V-Ray just says, no, I'm not using that texture. This will actually take in old textures and convert them on the fly, or actually convert them into new fully usable textures. Some things I'll show you off the bat here. Like, I have two cards. So if I go into my settings, I've got render priority, low, medium, or high. And I'm going to set if I want to use priority on something. So for example, I've got two devices, and I'm going to fire up both devices here. Now, what I'm going to do with the first device is say use primary. Use priority on this GPU, and I'm going to put priority to low. The reason for that is because if you're trying to do other things on your computer at the same time, it's going to get a little hairy. For example, if you're trying to record a tutorial with a screen capture program, and you're trying to render something on your computer at the same time, the thing is going to flip out. So I'm telling this GPU to do low priority here, and then so it's not using the whole thing, and then the GPU number 1, which is the second card I put in, is actually going to be going full blast here. So to make this super simple, I'm going to put in a cube. Oops. I'm going to put in that cube there, and then I'm going to put in a plane. And this is all about textures and tags. So I'm going to create a shader, which is a Cinema 4D Octane shader. I'm just going to have the standard white. I'm going to place it on both of these objects. And the next thing I need is a camera. So I can go to objects here. I'm going to make an Octane camera. There it is. I'm going to do daylight. Now the daylight basically does the sun, and you have control over the sun. Now watch how fun this gets. Now I hope that doing this screen cap and this at the same time doesn't screw anything up. So here we go. Octane dialog. If you're using the new beta of this, which I haven't actually tried yet, it's actually built all of these different little windows into one nice window. So I really like the direction they're going with that. This is R16, by the way, in case you were wondering about that. It is officially not supported unless you're on... No, actually, yeah, if you're on Windows, it is supported in the new like beta versions. But in the stable releases, I don't think 16 is supported anywhere, but I've done a full project in it. I can tell you, if you want to do anything with fur or hair, you still have to use R15 on Mac. The beta R16 for Windows will do hair and fur. This one doesn't. That's the only thing that I've come up against so far that doesn't work. The nice thing, though, is that R16 projects are backwards compatible to R15. So if you run into an issue, you can just go back to R15. The license works on your computer if you have 16 and 15 installed at the same time because it is the same computer. So I'm going to hit this button right here, and it's going to fire up. And here we go. I got a cube. And here's good old Octane. Look at that. There we go. Quick overview. Grab that daylight. Check this out. Super, super awesome and fast. It's working very fast. And looks like my screen capture utility is still going strong up there. So that's good. And you got your you got stuff like pause, for example. If you want to go mess with something and you don't want the computer to calculate, you can pause and zoom in, do what you got to do, and then unpause. And that's good in situations where this starts to get really complicated and moving around gets a little slower. You know, I would recommend that if you have that low priority thing on. It shouldn't be too bad. In the settings here, you've got different types of rendering. You've got direct lighting, you've got path tracing, which is higher quality, and PMC, which is super crazy quality. And they are all used for different things. If you really want to dig down in the details, there's a really great manual for Octane for Cinema 4D specifically that will go through all of this. Some of the things that I did learn right off the bat is how to handle things like the specular depth. If you do, actually, I'll go to, what do I want to do here? I'm going to do a new Octane material. Oh man, I keep hitting all the wrong buttons. All right. This material, I'm actually going to change the type of material to a specular material. Now, usually I use two screens, so let me lay this out here. If you put your material, your specular material, onto something, and you hit refresh, there we go. Now, it's really cool the way that it gets refraction and all that stuff on the fly. If I put like a couple cubes like this, I'm going to move them around, get all crazy. And now this is where your specular depth actually is going to come in handy. Okay, I'm going to refresh so we can see what's going on here. Now notice there's black stuff going on here. That's because the rays are only allowed to go to a certain depth. So it saves you on render time. You know, you don't want to have 32 levels if you don't have to have 32 levels. So you can take this down or up. So if you've got, you know, weird black things going on, that's your specular depth. You've also got glossy depth, AO distribution. Make sure your ray epsilon, you've always got your ray epsilon to at least 0.0001. You can bring it up. What will happen is a lot of times, if you're just using regular Cinema 4D, if you've got two objects and they're exactly on the same plane, you know, or very slightly off, usually Cinema 4D is okay with handling that. But what will happen when you start working with stuff like this is some of the rays will get a little wonky, and they'll start bouncing weird or whatever. So you bring up your ray epsilon, that will fix some of that stuff. You've got your max samples. This is really the most important thing. This is about render quality. You want your samples to be low enough to where they work, you know, and everything looks good, but you don't want them so high that your render times are crazy high. Now, this is all about the grain. So this is something that is more like the way that a camera works. You've got shutter speed and aperture and that stuff. If you go to your camera tag, you can actually see here under your camera imager, you can turn it on and adjust things like exposure and f-stop and ISO. Now, the thing about this is that when you're using max samples, it's only gonna render that long. And like I said before, the way that this works, if you have 128 samples and it renders in 1 minute, well, 256 samples are going to render in 2 minutes. Like it's literally double every time you double. So I personally, because I don't know if this is true, I just kind of feel this way about things like this, I like to do these in doubles. So I like to go 16, 32, 64 like that. So I like to go 128, 256, up to 1024. However high I have to go, I like to increment it that way. What's cool about this though is, say that you have your max samples way jacked up, and you really want to fine tune the grain, because again, it works like a camera does, where the longer the exposure, the less grain there's going to be. So the longer your render, the less grain there's going to be. So if I jack this way up and I'm looking at my render settings and it says rendering 8%, it says how much time it's taken, 26 seconds, and my samples, I'm like, you know what? I'm good if I'm at 1081 samples. That's fine. I don't need to go all the way up to 10,000. Well, I'll actually pause this and I'll say, you know what? I really only need that much. The same way you could go by time. Like if you have a time constraint and you're like, well, I only want to go 4 minutes a frame, you can figure out what that's going to take. In fact, in your settings, you can go in if you really want to, and you can set a maximum render time. So say you're rendering 2,000 samples, and then you render the whole thing out, and some of the frames were, for some reason, maybe near the end, there's more complicated geometry, they were taking way too long. You can set it by time. I don't really recommend that because you're going to end up with grain. As far as grain goes, and when the grain gets better or worse, if you're using a lot of natural light like this and you put a bunch of stuff in the scene, you're really not going to have a lot of grain. They're all reflecting off of each other. You got plenty of light. You could go with something like 512 and be fine. However, I did something where the lights went down recently. The lights go down, and then you've got the other lights that come on, and they're just like little miniature lights, and all this grain shows up. So the way around that is to render that section with a higher sample rate and put them together. That's the best way, I think, to do that. So you got other things here. especially in your camera, you've got some really cool things. So like presets, you can go in here and get some really cool looks. Why isn't this continuing down? Hello, hello, hello. Is that really it? I thought there was more than that. I don't know why it ends with L, linear. Anyway, you can do stuff like Kodachrome. Mama, don't take my Kodachrome away. That kind of thing. Let's see. Fresh. See, here are the looks. And the looks aren't necessarily just about exposure and f-stop. They're kind of about the look that each of these types of cameras have. Then you have stuff like white balance, where you can set your own white balance here. That changes the color. See, that got bluer. You've got vignetting, which is really nice. I don't like to do a lot of that, you know, pre-render. I'll do that in post. Saturation, hot pixel removal. Sometimes you will get little weird white dots. What else we got here? You've got post-processing. It's really cool, but again, I like to do that stuff in post. You have really, really cool aperture and depth tools in here, as well as some stereo stuff, which I've been hoping at some point to experiment with this and Oculus Rift, because the amount of... Let me turn this down before my cards freak out. All right, 128 samples. The way that this renderer works, it's so real time, you know, almost, that I would love to find a way to integrate the Oculus Rift into this so that you could kind of see what you're doing in real time. That would be really fun. So a lot of stereo controls. It's got stereo, off axis, and it's got, you know, just left, just right, side by side. There is, where is it? Oh, it's got panoramic, which is pretty cool. Let me show you what panoramic looks like. Render. Yeah, so you can do a panoramic view, and I'm thinking, and I haven't gotten to this yet, but you could actually render out like an HDRI type thing. That's an actual animation that you could then bring into stuff like Oculus Rift. Still haven't had the chance to play with all of that yet, but you can see what it's doing here. What else do we have? Let me put my camera back and bring this window back up. You've also got, I think we've done everything in here for the most part. You've also got these controls here, like you can actually pull your focus, which is kind of fun. You've also got different modes, like if you want to see just a flat mode with no textures, or if you want to see one without any sort of transparency or reflection. So you'll see the actual texture. Then over here, this is really cool. You've got DB, which is the database, and they have a live database. This is so awesome. If you're trying to build something really quick, this is just super, super cool. You pick something you want. Let me find something with a little bit of reflection on it, actually. I'm going to do something like, I don't know. I'm gonna do like a weird glass texture here, and I hit download. It's gonna put it down here from the internet, from the interwebs, all on its own. And then I'm also gonna get like some sort of shiny wood. That's what she said. And I'm gonna put the glass on one of these cubes. Guess I'll delete these other textures. And I can do like that, and then I'm going to put the wood on another cube, and actually I'll put that wood onto the plane as well. So this should be fun. And put this back into full mode. Now look how absolutely incredible this is. I mean, think about what this is doing right here. This is refracting and reflecting all this in near real time. Look at everything that's going on down here. Look at everything that's going on as far as the bump in the glass. Now this does take some getting used to, as far as, you know, how the textures work and stuff like that. There's some really great tutorials. I think in the last tutorial I did, I mentioned a site that's got a really good $75 package, and it's a great starting point for learning about how to use this stuff. Pause that there, and I don't know, is there anything else? You know, you've got your Octane LES stuff. You can bring in, you know, the IES files, which there's a library of that stuff. I think if you type it in here in Cinema, see, you've got these files already. So you can do like IES Lite, and then bring in that file straight to the light itself, so you can have more control. Because remember, this isn't something where you can just make random spotlights and stuff. You know, this is like natural, real world type lighting. So if you want a spotlight, you have to have a designed spotlight. It's not as simple as just throwing in a generic spotlight. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. You've got HDRI environments, which are cool. So here's something interesting. I'm not 100% happy with the way that they've changed some stuff in R16 as far as some of the preset HDRI stuff they had, because it's harder to set up. But it does work to your advantage when you are working in Octane, because, for example, they have all these HDR files. If you type in HDR, and if you are working with that instead of daylight, let me just turn off these lights here, you can see what it looks like. I'll do a new object and do HDRI environment. Refresh. Okay, so I have just a generic environment right now. It's just blank. And you want to get some sort of HDRI file to go in here, and you've got all these presets anyway. So what you do is you click on the tag, and you got your Octane image texture that goes right here. Well, right now it's blank. It's filename.hdr. If you go to your content browser and grab one of these, like the one that's number 4 that I love, I call it the winery. There you go. So you've got a full, you know, correct HDRI file, and you know, now you've got reflections. Give you a better example of what it would look like. I'll throw something on one of these cubes. Something a little more reflective, and refresh. There we go. Yeah, that's super clear, so I should probably fix that. Now what's nice about this is if you have a texture already loaded, you can actually see what it's doing in real time. If I create a new Octane material and I throw it on, I'm going to throw it on this cube, because I want something not specular. I want something that's like highly reflective instead. Okay, so you got your material loaded, and that's a base material. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to remember how to do all of this. I believe it's this, or wait, no, it's not. It's a glossy material. There we go. So you got specular, you've got your roughness, you've got your index. So to take my index to 1, now you can see what's going on here. There we go. That's more like a mirror. Now, real time, that's pretty incredible. You can do all sorts of stuff with normals and all of that. I've been using a piece of software called, what is it called? Super Bump or something like that. That's really cool. That lets you make some cool bump maps and normal maps, and you can add them in here and make some really, really detailed looking multi-layered textures. I think that's about it, but the last thing I'd like to do is talk about the tags for your objects, because if you create something, and let me do something non-reflective to make this a little bit easier and faster. If you create an animation, this is the first problem that I had, and didn't realize that all I had to do was use a tag. This will help you with your rendering as well. If you are animating something, I'll just do a quick couple keyframes here. Okay, there's a moving cube. And if you want to see what that looks like, and you start going through the timeline, you'll notice it's not updating. What you need to do is take that object that's moving and give it an actual geometry tag, the object tag, and you can set groups. So you could do like a mesh number. You can do subdivision level and all that other kind of stuff. You got mainly the thing that I like about it is that you've got the groups. So you could go into your renderer and you can say, I only want to see animation on this group and not that other group, and it helps you. But it doesn't start working unless you have in your options check geometries on. And if you have that, it might take a little bit longer to load. But the cool part is, as you go through here, it's actually checking the geometry and it's updating in real time, which is pretty sweet when you think about, you know, trying to visualize what something's going to look like that you're working on. So that's pretty cool, and that actually gives you, you know, in your actual render options, when you go to do your real render here, when you select Octane Render, you can actually change some of these, for example, and say, you know, send all the scene data or just resend only the updated objects. Do I need to check materials every frame? So if you're doing something where you have a whole bunch of animation and everything has the correct tag, it's going to end up saving you a lot of time in your rendering, because it's kind of figured out which things are animated based on these object tags. So I really like that. There's some other things in here. I haven't tried any network rendering yet. I think you might have to have a license for each one, so I haven't gone down that yet. The kernel settings, you can, you know, if this is not checked, it's just going to use your settings that we were looking at before. If you want to have separate settings when you're working and separate render settings that are maybe higher, you don't want to worry about going back and forth, you can set them up, you can enable it. It's all the same settings, but it just kind of overwrites all of that. And you can, you know, if you want to render at 1024 samples, for example, but you only want to work with 128 when you're just, you know, looking at what you're doing, and you don't want to have to set that back and forth to remember what it was set at, that's really nice. You can also do multipass, like you can still do your regular multipass stuff if you want, but there is multipass stuff in here that some of it works differently than the regular multipass, so it just depends on what you're doing. And of course, the one thing I didn't mention about these kernels is you got info channels. So if you want to see some real-time feedback on shading normals, Z-depth, that's a really good one. Although I think Z-depth is actually backwards, if I'm not mistaken, where white is black and black is white as far as your depth in your camera. But a lot of times, I don't know about you, but if I'm working with depth, I like to render a frame and make sure the depth is correct before I render out an entire depth pass. This helps because you can see this in real time. Material IDs, that can be helpful sometimes. UV coordinates. There's a plugin for After Effects that uses that sometimes. I don't know if it's any good. You've got object IDs, which you can do like, you know, frame buffer type stuff with that, and then ambient occlusion only. So there's a lot of fun stuff in here that may or may not be useful, but there's so much to play around with in here, and it's so great and so easy to use, so easy to get set up. I really didn't have any issues getting it set up. I'm planning on in the future trying to do a breakdown of some Octane stuff and show how I did it. So I might get to that this weekend and release it sometime in January or February. That's all I can think of right now. There's so much to talk about. I'm so excited about Octane, and there's so much more I want to learn about it that I haven't learned yet, especially with lighting, with lights and settings for lights, and I'm really trying to dig deep down into it. I'm literally sitting there just reading the manual and going through everything just to figure out what every little detail is, because I'm still not there yet. If you have any questions about it, feel free to ask on Facebook or on YouTube. The YouTube comment section are a great place to talk about that. I don't want to pull a lot away from the Cinema 4D subreddit, but I did make a separate Octane subreddit for people who are just interested in doing just full-on Octane stuff. Please, if you want to get in there, if you want to submit cool-looking stuff that people have done in Octane, I would love to see that. I haven't really announced that, so it's just kind of sitting there with like 3 or 4 posts that I put in there just to start. It would be really great to see some stuff that you've done, or that your friends have done, or that other people are doing, just all Octane stuff. Again, I really don't want to pull from the Cinema 4D subreddit, but it is nice sometimes to have a little place for that on the side, just to concentrate on that if you're interested in just using that renderer. Please hit us up on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Brograph. Twitter, we're on there. We release everything on Facebook, on Twitter, and on our website, brograph.com. You can also, if you're still like into Reddit and you just want to do Reddit stuff, we do post everything that we do on a subreddit for Brograph. It's reddit.r/Brograph, and it'll just have like a straight up list of everything that we've done. However, if you go to brograph.com, you get access to other stuff like, links to the zip files that are other things that maybe links and stuff that go with the tutorials. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. You'll also get those updates the moment that they come out. We are over 1,000. Over 1,000 subscribers, which is pretty phenomenal. We're really happy about that. Better to have 1,000 quality subscribers than to have 10,000 random meaningless subscribers. So like, you guys have made it happen. You guys are following us, and you're talking to us, and we love it, and you guys are all quality subscribers. We want more. So we're actually over 1,000 right now, so let's make it over 9,000. And I can't think of anything else. I think that's pretty much covered everything. If you're interested in doing this, if you're actually going to go for it, get this set up. It is technically relatively not that expensive to do. Each card costs about $270 plus a $50 power supply and the $600 render engine. It's a little investment, but if you want to make that jump, it's definitely fully worth it, and I recommend it. So until next time, I hope you've learned something today. I hope that it's been some insight for you, and have a good one, and we'll see you on the next one. I'm going to do a little bit on contracts when you're a graphic designer or a motion designer. So have a good one. Later, bros. It's pretty good, I guess.